Hey there, fellas! In this video, let's discuss the suspension of a car. Specifically, we'll go into individual components that are either cheap or expensive, to find out if you should overpay for the latter. I've got two sets of suspension bits, one for the left side, the other for the right. One of the sets consists of the most expensive parts you can get in stores, while the other is comprised of the very cheapest. The cheap set cost us 9,800 rubles, or $124 at the time of filming, while the expensive parts were 24,800, 25 grand for good measure, or 316 bucks. That is a considerable difference, and we'll be fitting these parts to that Subaru Forester. And the experiment itself will continue until all of these parts crumble to pieces. Let's go. Right, guys, now we piece the suspension back together, starting with one of the fundamental parts, which is the shock absorber. Now, we'd really like to do a comparison to show you guys the difference between a shock that is expensive and one that is cheap. First, there's the price. The cheap one costs 1,050 rubles, while the expensive one was 5,200. Looking at them, you can't really tell the difference between the two. They look pretty much identical, and they're almost the same weight. But during assembly, we noticed that the height at which the spring seats are welded on differs between them. Also, we noticed that on the expensive shock, the polymer coating is very prone to getting damaged. It just comes right off. Also, the threads on the expensive shock are way worse. The bolts were very hesitant to go in. Now let's talk sway bar lengths. The cheap one was 315 rubles, the expensive one was 2,100. But the cheap one came with some nuts, while the expensive one didn't have any. The dust covers on the expensive ones are much higher quality than on the cheap ones, though. But after installing it, we noticed that the cheap one is sitting crookedly. The bushings, no visual differences between the cheap and expensive ones, and they were both an identically good fit. Though prices differed, of course. 390 for the cheap one, 1,600 for the expensive one. Rear suspension arm, the cheap one was 2,450. The expensive one was 7,500. And we didn't notice any difference neither during inspection nor when installing them. After rebuilding the suspension, the car is now slanted. That could be because of the front struts, with the spring seats being at different heights, or there could be some other reason that we're not aware of. Check this out, guys. The car is fully assembled, as in elements of the suspension are all where they're supposed to be. And so now it is high time to get to the testing. Mind you, this won't be a regular test. Instead, we're going to be doing it on this here shaker. The car is on there, we are ready, so let's fire up the shaker. And we'll leave the car in this position until we break the suspension. Day 1. Now, along the way, we are going to be adjusting the frequency of the machine to imitate different types of road surfaces. After just 20 minutes of this, the oil inside the shock absorber has begun to get pretty warm. So the shaker has been working for 3 hours now, and the only thing that has changed is the condition of the sway bar bushings. They slightly differ in their stiffness, but overall this is an interesting process. So far that's all we've noticed. Let's continue observing. Day 1, Day 2. Day 2, Day 3. Day 4, Day 5, you get the point. All of a sudden, a knock has developed, but only at a certain frequency. We just need to figure out the rate at which it starts to knock. That's definitely the suspension. Are you kidding me? Is that a ball joint? Sounds like a ball joint. I mean, fuck, that's a bad knock. So the cheap parts, and we are not making this up, they are literally falling apart. The sway bar link has gone to shit. It's broken. And it did raise some eyebrows after we installed it. You'll recall that the angle of the stud and how the link is offset is very different compared to that other OEM one. It was a marked difference. And what's really interesting is that, well, things just keep getting better with the cheap suspension parts. Now a lower ball joint is gone. It's a very critical component of the suspension, and it needs to be very reliable. But yeah, the lower ball joint has left the chat, it is now knocking. I reckon give it another 7 hours and it'll just fall apart. Meanwhile, on the right, where we've got the expensive components, everything is holding up just fine. But let's wait for a bit and see where this goes from here. So we are witnessing how certain components are slowly failing. But why don't we take this to a serious off-road trail? Increase the frequency on the machine, imitating a drive over some kind of severely nasty road. Let's get to it. This is great. Look at it hopping. So after 134 hours, they told me a new noise has developed, or rather that an old one got louder. Yes, it has gotten louder. And it's definitely not the sway bar link. That's actually the ball joint, and it's developed such a horrible wobble that you can literally feel it with your hand. I'd say that's about maybe 3 millimeters of play. I guess that at some point the polyamide layer peeled off, resulting in a way more severe wobble plus knocking. In some modes, I take it it's on the verge of evacuating even. Check this out, guys. In this particular mode, at such high frequency, which simulates a road that's not even gravel but covered with some pretty big rocks, well, the shocks are getting really hot. And what's really interesting is that the cheap and the expensive shocks are heating up quite differently. After reducing the tire pressure, the suspension pretty much ceased to knock altogether. This is not surprising, but when you bring the pressure up to slightly higher than normal, the knocking becomes awful. But at 1 kilo, you can't hear anything, almost as if the suspension isn't broken. This is actually rather interesting, guys. On the left side, where we have the poverty spec parts, as we can see, the sway bar link is slowly on its way out. I mean, you know what? It's really not that slow of a process. It's actually happening quite fast. Okay, guys, so after a bit more time has passed, not a whole lot more, it's been about 3 days since the last part has failed. And I'm guessing you can clearly hear what's up. And at some point, we were hit with a surprise. Allow me to show you. Let me just shut the machine down. So I decided to have a look and check this out. So on the inner side of the wheel and tire, we've got oil. I did some investigating to figure out where the oil might have come from, and the answer turned out to be very simple. Now the car is stationary, it's hard to determine with there being no dust, but then I raised my eyes and noticed that this boot is covered with oil. I kept on digging, and then I learned that the strut has pissed itself. Yeah, there you go. Obviously, they're getting warm. The oil is moving around inside of them and heating up. You've got the friction and all of that. But none of us expected it to fail as quickly as it did. Now, obviously, parts such as tie rod ends, ball joints, sway bar links, they're under quite a bit of stress. We also suspected the bushings might fail, with them being of the cheapest variety. But for the shock to crap out so quickly, that we did not expect. But here we are, the shock has taken a it failed. So a few more days have gone by, and the knocking has gotten worse. The ball joint no longer wants to do its job properly. Honestly, it is not safe to drive on this sort of ball joint. It is destined for the bin because the car's handling will be severely compromised. And given how it's knocking, you're actually running the risk of it falling apart. In a situation where that does happen, the wheel is going to be contorted, which is never a good thing. In the meantime, the expensive part is performing very well, and there's not even a hint of play in it at this time. So we've reached the point where leaving this car on the shaker, given the current condition of the suspension, is actually downright frightening. The reason being that on this side the parts are so badly beaten up that the car is actually inching its way off and attempting to evacuate the machine. So this is actually getting pretty dangerous. But here's what I think we should do. We have also replaced a few bits in the rear suspension. And so I suggest we reposition the shakers to the rear end, relocate those hard props to the front, and let the shakers do their thing. We got some new parts back there, and so let's see what happens to the rear suspension. We also have a cheap and an expensive side. Let's do this. So here's what's happening in the back. The truth is, there's not much you can break back here. I mean, of course you've got bushings, also you've got sway bar links, struts. So there are definitely parts back here that can suffer failure. But what's interesting here is that while it hasn't been on the machine and gotten shaken for too long, but you'd recall that when we had the shakers underneath the front wheels, the rear end was also moving around. And so here's what's going on. We can see that the bushings which help attach the sway bar to the rear subframe have failed. And the really interesting thing is that it doesn't really come through all that well on film. You can't hear it knocking, but when you touch it with your hand, you can feel the wobble, that it's knocking. I reckon we will be able to demonstrate that. And the funny part about all of this is that both the expensive rubber bushing and the cheap one, both of them have actually failed. And there's a bit of food for thought. The matter of which variety you should choose. So this is an interesting development, and it's something that makes this whole thing really unsafe. You see, the suspension has fallen apart, especially up front. You would have been able to see and hear that. And though we've got everything in the correct position, but the car is slowly but surely trying to slip off, because of everything being so beat up. Again, this is becoming unsafe. And so I suggest we take everything apart and do a thorough inspection to see, well, perhaps there's something that we haven't noticed yet. But yeah, I think if we remove all of the parts and lay them out on the bench, we'll be able to identify all of the defects and whatever was broken during the course of this experiment. Yeah, we'll be able to see all of that. And so let's get all of this off, do an inspection, see what sort of state all of it is in, and of course draw a conclusion on whether cheap or expensive suspension parts are the way to go. Right, let's carry on. Okay guys, now it's time for us to sum up this video. On this table we have got all of the front suspension parts that we used, the expensive ones, and I mean the most expensive ones. And of course the cheapest ones that we could buy. And let's have a look, starting with the sway bar links. The slang term for which is balls. Here we have the expensive one, it was a great fit. Also, it performed very well. Not to mention its condition is pretty much like brand new. Now we take the cheap one. Yeah, and this sway bar link, it is totally rooted. But now let's have a look at the sway bar bushings. This is the pricey one, and it actually looks pretty good. All because this one was coated with some sort of, I don't even know, talcum powder or something. And what's curious is that, well, it would appear as if it actually helped out. I mean, this does look pretty good. Now I'm gonna go ahead and grab the cheaper one. And what can I tell you? It looks good enough at first glance. But when you have a look inside, yeah, this looks... It definitely started to wear out. That I can tell you for certain. It looks like it was made out of a softer compound. What else do I got? Ball joints, terrific. Let me grab the expensive one. And the expensive one is in the exact same condition it used to be. It's nice and tight, it feels good. There's no play, the dust cover is intact. It looks great. The cheap one, I am pretty sure you can see it. What has happened to it? There is a lot of play. The dust cover is fine, but fitting this sort of ball joint, you shouldn't do that. You should just throw this away. As for the suspension arms, we did replace the bushings inside of those. And to be completely honest, the ones that are expensive look totally fine. Nothing seems to be wrong with them at all. They really do look like they've just been installed. Okay, now let's look at the cheap front suspension arm. This one also looks good to me. No abnormalities to report, it would seem. Oh wait, I take that back. This one has got a crack in it. Doesn't look like a new bushing to me. There it is, see it? My guess is that, but then on the other hand... Oh, looks like it detached even. Will you look at that? Yeah, it's peeling away from the metal rim. See that? This is not going to last much longer. This looks perfectly fine. Yeah, this is good. What if I push it the other way? I mean, I guess you could call this a crack. But honestly, I don't think it is. I think it's just the stuff that the rubber was coated with. In that spot, some of it was removed, creating the illusion that there's a crack. But over here, that's an actual crack. Those are cheap parts for you. Perhaps they manufacture them quickly. That's why they're so cheap and low quality. Anyway, what else do we got? Shocks. This is the expensive one. This one is looking good, it's not leaking. Nothing is wrong with it. Though during the experiment, both were getting pretty warm. Now the cheap one and... well, you probably see it yourselves. It developed a leak, and from the looks of it, it lost a lot of oil. What sort of gas-charged shock is this? The mount, well, here things get interesting. How can I convey the knock? Anyways, so the bearing in there is wobbling. Mind you, the nut has been tightened down. Now let's have a look at the tie rods. The lubricant is a different color, showing that it was working. But this is nice and tight. Now let me grab the cheap one. And this one is also looking fine. Nothing seems to be broken. So the tie rod and the tie rod end, both are in decent enough condition. So both sides, the cheap and expensive, held up fairly well. Okay, now let's inspect the rear suspension. We've moved everything apart. And in the rear suspension, all of the components, I mean, they might have just spent less time on the shaker. Though while we were doing the front end, the rear was also rocking. But for the most part, everything is fine, except for the sway bar side of things. Here we do have some issues. Here we have the expensive sway bar link, and I don't know what has happened to it. But I mean, yeah, the ball joint has broken in, but it moves around with utter ease. But if we look at the cheap one, it's the exact opposite. It's as if it hadn't been used even. The resistance is nice. Truly as if it hadn't been on a car. Also, you can see some clear evidence of lube. This tells us that they put a lot of it in there, which is always a good thing. So it is well lubricated. And you'll see that this works very well. One more thing I'd like to add. Of course, it's up to you what sort of parts you want to fit to your car. But I think the outcome is clear. Make of it what you will, draw your own conclusions. You saw it all for yourselves, and that's it for this video. Catch you guys later.